Hi everybody, thanks for watching this video and presentation. We're going to talk about landscape scale management. This is a presentation that I'm going to be giving on February 9th in Rocky Ford at the Arkansas Valley Farm Ranch Water Symposium. The reason that we're talking about landscape scale management at this particular symposium is uh, Crowley County and Otero counties and that part of the Arkansas Valley was once highly irrigated. Lots of farming, irrigated farming going on. Over time, the water has been reduced and farm ground has just been let go, not put back to the native prairie it was. Lots of small ownership um, and lots of fragmented ownership. And so, talking with the extension agent there and some of the other landowners, we've kind of been coming up with ideas about how we could get landscape scale management in play. And this presentation is kind of the setting off point for that to kind of get the idea flowing in the community there. So I'd like to walk you through some of these ideas, these slides that we're going to talk about, some of these concepts. Specifically in this presentation, we'll talk about the importance of landscape scale management and the difficulties of landscape scale management. And we'll talk about primarily, most of our time will be spent going through two possible solutions, two different strategies that we could engage to do good landscape scale management. In this presentation, I am not going to present any silver bullets. There's no guarantee that any of these ideas would ever work for you in your specific situation. And it's just an idea to get the ball rolling. There's not going to be any sugarcoating here. There's certainly a lot of limitations and challenges, but those are also complemented by a lot of opportunity as well. And this isn't a sales pitch. I'm not trying to sell you anything here. Just wanting to start getting folks outside the box and start thinking about different ways that maybe we can do a little better for our watershed and ultimately our pocketbook. So what is our landscape? So here in the western United States, this picture here is kind of a familiar sight. We have lots of different land ownerships by lots of different people in a variety of shapes and sizes. And then we also have all sorts of roads and rivers and lakes and power lines and pipelines that are on our landscape that we have to deal with, easements and right-of-ways, different levels of ownership stacked up on top of just one parcel. And all of those have a different context for the way that they manage land. And so this is the challenge. This is the challenge that we have is to make this block of country work correctly. But we need a better definition. And so in preparing for this presentation, I tried to look up what landscape scale management is. And the best definition, formal definition that I found was for landscape ecology. And that definition is landscape ecology emphasizes the interactions between spatial patterns and ecological processes. So the interactions between those. That is the causes and consequences of spatial heterogeneity in a range of scales. So that big complicated definition says that we've got a bunch of different stuff in a big size and they all interact together. And so because that's so complicated and so wordy and unuseful really, I came up with my own definition of what landscape scale management is. And so landscape scale management is the orchestrated curation of ecological processes for anthropocentric gain at a scale which would otherwise fragment into disassociated management paradigms leading to lower ecologic, economic, and social benefit. In other words, herding cats. But really, we need to define what we're talking about here. So what is a landscape? A landscape is big enough for different ecological types to interact. So we have sandy soils, we have clay soils, we have uplands and lowlands, forested areas and grasslands. A landscape is big enough that its management can significantly impact downstream management. So when we're talking about acreage size, when we talk about a little 40 out in the middle of a watershed, if what you do on that 40 acres in this 12,000 acre watershed, whether it be good or bad, is fairly insignificant because the management surrounding you is so much greater in impact, even though that might be brought up, chunked down into smaller acreages as well. But your little management there on that 40 acres really has no measurable bearing on the water quality at the bottom of that watershed, right? So it's big enough that when we manage it as a whole, this whole 12,000 acres, if you manage that whole 12,000 acre watershed as a whole, then you're actually that management decision that you make will actually have bearing on what that water sample is at the bottom of the watershed. So we have to scale it up to an appropriate size there. A landscape typically can be defined by major topographic features, water courses, and ecological types. So this is kind of self-explanatory, where we have, where I'm from, it's called the Greenhorn Valley. It's the entire watershed. It's the entire watershed of the Greenhorn Creek, but it all kind of sits in this one valley, and there's a community in there, and so that would be a landscape, right? We call it thing, we have an entire area that is called one particular name, defined by ridges and mountains, valleys, and then we could also call it by water courses, everything north of the river and south of east of that other river, and ecological types. This starts getting into a bigger area when we start talking about maybe like the Palouse Prairie. That's a really definite type of ecological type, or the shortgrass prairie. That's a really large area, but we can start narrowing that down into more unique, specific ecological types within those broader ecozones. And so what all of that is a landscape. So what is landscape scale management? Well, proper landscape scale management coordinates the land uses for positive ecological, economic, and social productivity at that scale. All right. So why should you care? Why should you care about the landscape? Well, first off, there's a challenge at play. We've got a lot of issues that we're facing as a society that we can only really solve when we start working at the landscape scale. And that, this list here, I think at the top of the list is loss of pollinator habitat. 1 in 3 bites that you take is influenced by a pollinator. Fragmented migration routes. That's another big wildlife issue where we start having disassociated management paradigms. Our major wildlife resources start running into trouble when they have migration route fragmentation. Decrease local economic vitality. When we start breaking down into smaller and smaller acreages, and those folks don't work together in a positive way, our small rural communities begin to lose a lot of their economic viability, and we lose those communities altogether. And we have lost a lot of communities because of that loss of productivity at the landscape scale. There's also opportunity at the landscape scale. It's important to remember, I'm going to mention this twice through this presentation, and maybe more, that no man is an island. You and your management on your acreage, no matter how big you are, whether you're at the top of the mountain or at the delta going into the ocean, you are either affected by or you affect somebody else or both. So it's absolutely important that we have this opportunity, recognize the opportunity that you have neighbors that you need to neighbor with. Whether they're upstream, downstream, left or right of you, you have to work with them. And that creates the opportunity for collaboration, cooperation, financial gain, ecological gain, social positivity. All of these things we can do together and still be independent and still be productive and still be profitable, but working at the landscape scale for the better of the whole. So in the west, here's our little western landscape here. We have three main, uh, two and a half main landowners in the west, and those are either agricultural landowners or recreation and aesthetic landowners. People who like to own their piece of the west, take pictures of it, and mail it to their friends back in the city. The last one here, the energy context landowners, there's certainly big chunks of the western states that have an energy context. They're fairly low productivity for agricultural value. They're fairly low productivity for the aesthetic value or any recreational wildlife value. They're just kind of out in the middle of nowhere and look like crap. But they've got oil under them, or they've got coal under them, or they've got any sort of number of other non-renewable resources on that site. And so there is a large land ownership that does have some agricultural value to it, but the highest and best use of that land is going to be energy production. And so it's important to remember, if you live in those types of areas, to consider that some land bases have a strong energy context. So our agricultural producers kind of look like this in our landscape, right? We've got three main producers. They've got some deeded land. They've got some leased land. It's kind of spread out here and there. Maybe they work together, where their parcels collide. And then in the middle, those little blocks here and there that aren't colored in, those are folks that don't have any agricultural value at all. They aren't even being agriculturally produced. And so this is very common to have fragmented, leased, and deeded ground, and this leads to increased management costs and increased transportation costs to get your livestock from one side of the ranch to the other, which may be many miles apart. And this leads to a limited ability to have consistent management across your ranches. And that's based on the variety of leases you might have, the type of land that each of those parcels are, the distance that management cost increases, and the seasonality of use, especially when we start talking about working in the federal nexus. The seasonality of use puts a big constraint on how you can use the parcels that you lease or own within your fragmented land base. And so how do we make this work? We've got all of our landowners in here. We've got all of our different easements and things stacked up on it. It's herding cats. It's a mess. It's hard to do, and it leads to lower productivity on our ecological, economic, and social scales. So we need solutions. And so we're going to get into the third part here, which we'll spend most of our time on. And I want to talk about two different ways that we can go about this. The first solution, our wildlife aesthetic solution, is one that we're actually trying to get started this year. We're sending out the letters here soon to the landowners in the watershed, and we'll talk about the details of that. The second one is a little more, it's completely agriculturally focused, and it involves getting producers to cooperate together on leased ground in a way that's a little familiar, but still a little unique. We're gonna come back to the oil and gas industry for a little bit of insight and inspiration for how we're going to do that solution. So we'll get into the wildlife solution here, aesthetic solution, and discuss that. Before we get into this very deeply, we need to talk about our assumptions that we're making in these solutions, as well as the limitations that we have when we're being creative about landscape management objectives. And so our assumptions are that cows are good and not evil. We like cows. Cows are a tool. We can use cows to improve our ecological productivity. We know, I don't think this is an assumption, this is an absolute truth, that no man is an island. And then we're also going to assume that everybody can be good neighbors and get along. That's absolutely critical in any sort of landscape scale thing that we do where neighbors are having to cooperate together, is that people can get along. Our limitations in really anything in life is our existing management paradigm. What do we do now, and are we comfortable getting away from that? Our creativity. How much can you get outside that box and really consider some serious alternatives? And most importantly, is your fear of being successful. There are so many people in this world that want to hold you back because they don't want you to be successful, and that creates this subconscious fear of stepping out of your comfort zone, making more money, having more success, however you value that success, because you're getting ahead when others are not. And if you let that control you, you will never be as good as you ever could be, and certainly you won't ever be better than anyone around you. And not that that should be the measure of success, but that's the measure of unsuccess is how successful you are compared to others. And so don't let that be your guiding post on in life, and certainly don't let it be the guidepost when you start trying to get outside the box. Completely let that go and be as successful as you can be. So we'll get into this solution here. Um, what the problem we're trying to solve specifically with a lot of this is with the wildlife aesthetic solution is the loss of pollinator habitat. We've got really poor watershed health in this area that we're working. We're working in southern Pueblo County, Colorado. It's pinyon juniper, mesa, arroyo landscape. Um, it's a break line type topography. We've got fragmentation of migration routes, historic migration routes through the area due to the interstate and the interstates that run through there, different highways that run through there, as well as the kind of urban, it's not urban sprawl, but a lot of sort of development going on into the rural areas out there. And then a severe loss of habitat quality. Just due to poor grazing management over the last century. A lot of dryland wheat farming that was just let go and went back to weeds and first successional species. Juniper, the pinyon juniper stands have lost their natural uh, fire patterns and have lost a lot of quality in those pinyon juniper stands as well. So this is what we're going to try and fix a little bit. And we have an awesome opportunity because we have landowners, small acreage landowners in this area that are of all sorts of mixed background, and that's going to provide a really cool asset. Additionally, we have just as a society, we have strong conservation-minded urbanites who live in town and don't and maybe go and recreate out in the rural areas, but most importantly just want to know that things are being taken care of in the world, and they're willing to spend a lot of disposable income on noble causes that do that and satisfy that conservation concern. We also have modern funding methods like Kickstarter and Indiegogo and all these crowdsourcing opportunities. There's also tons of different grant opportunities and green investment and things like that that we can look towards as well for funding opportunities. There's also a severe lack of transparency and accountability in the way that we do conservation at the moment. We have a lot of large conservation organizations like World Wildlife Fund or maybe the Nature Conservancy that do really good work, but every dollar isn't necessarily accounted for back to the donors that give that dollar. If you give $15 to World Wildlife Fund, how many baby seals did you save? You don't know that number, and certainly nobody tells you where your $15 actually went to. And then on the opposite side of that, we have government organizations like NRCS, and certainly others that Extension, that do really good work, that are funded with tax dollars. And certainly I know when I pay taxes every year, I don't get a balance sheet back of how much good work NRCS did with the portion of my tax dollars that they received. So there's lack of transparency and accountability. we can leverage that in trying to find funding with our conservation-minded urbanites through these alternative funding methods. And so this all creates the perfect opportunity for some really awesome innovation in landscape scale conservation and enhancement. So what's our project? Our project there in southern Colorado is to improve the watershed health and improve wildlife habitat. We're also going to want to increase our landowners' land value and the agricultural value of their land, even though that they don't have an agricultural context. So when we increase the agricultural value, we're also going to be simultaneously increasing the habitat value. Those things go hand in hand. We also want to stabilize the erosion and soil loss that is so it's insane how much soil loss and erosion occurs in this site due to the natural erodibility of the soils, but also just due to mismanagement. Not even mismanagement, but just the lack of better management. And we can just do more with it. So how do we propose to do this? We're sending out the letters here very soon to 200 landowners across 11,000 acres. And what we're going to propose is to come in and thin and highline their junipers. We're going to lay those cuttings on contour. We're going to stabilize the different erosion channels through their property with one rock dams and other small, uninvasive erosion control techniques. And then we're going to come in and prescribe regenerative grazing and work with local grazers to fulfill that grazing prescription over the course of a 5-year grazing lease. And so our stakeholders, first and foremost, is the landowners, the 200 landowners that we're getting in contact with. Our second most important is the local agricultural producers. These people have an investment in the landscape, they have an investment in the local community, and they have an opportunity to profit from the opportunity that's presented here. Our next stakeholder is obviously the conservation-minded urbanites and wildlife interest groups, sportsmen's groups, and land conservation groups that we're going to be looking towards for funding, partial funding for this project. And then finally, we have government organizations, folks like the NRCS or maybe Extension, that can come in and utilize this project as a launching point for future projects, or maybe as an educational opportunity somewhere in the future. And so through all of this, regenerative stewardship is going to act as the project manager. And so we have our landowners, we have our stakeholders, our other stakeholders that are involved, and the project manager plans the project. The project manager coordinates all of the commitments. We're going to get contractual commitments from everybody for the work to be performed. We're going to get the funding, the partial funding, whatever amount that may be, thrown into the project. And then we're going to act as a general contractor to hire subcontractors to come in and do the fencing, to do the thinning, do the erosion control. We're going to be a general contractor and facilitate the leasing with our local grazers. And then for 5 years after the project is completed, we're going to be following up with annual monitoring and reporting and accountability to all of our stakeholders and landowners. So how does this actually work? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to utilize Kickstarter credits. We're going to utilize wildlife interest funding, and then we're also going to utilize landowner payment, all in some portion of the total cost to get this thing actually funded. So you can see that we have our project manager, and the project manager gives management to the project, and the project manager is going to receive some payment for those services. And then our stakeholders are going to give us funding. So we're going to get funding from the landowner and from wildlife interest groups that are interested in giving us money to get this done. And then we're also going to commit to giving those annual reports back to the stakeholders so they can use them for whatever sort of equity, social equity, or further reporting that they need it for. The one important thing to mention here is our Kickstarter credits. The Kickstarter credits are kind of an interesting concept that we want to try using to leverage money out of our or get money out of our urban minded or our conservation minded urbanites for X amount of dollars. I'm willing to commit to you. I'm going to give you a credit, a habitat credit that says your money went directly to this project, and this project is being maintained in this way, and we're going to give you this accountability and reporting for the life of the credit, which will be 5 years, and your money, you know exactly where that dollar was spent, and over the next 5 years, you know exactly how much good is coming out of that dollar. So that's a really neat thing that we're going to try and do. Maybe not exactly on this particular project in southern Colorado, but certainly on other projects in the future, we want to test that out. And then after that, after we have the money tied up, we have the commitments made, everybody's good to go. 2019 is the year to get it done, and we will do it. These are some shots from projects that we've had before, or that are test sites on our ranch there in southern Colorado. This is what the juniper treatment looks like, where we have very bare ground. We lay those biomass wattles on contour, and we have really great grass volunteerism that comes into those sites. This is what the biomass wattles look like when they're freshly cut. One rock dams. This was a great little spot where we did a one rock dam there. There's quite a few up above, filled in with sediment really nicely. This is actually a perennial trickle now. It once was barely ephemeral. It just would run when it rained. And here's kind of a shot of the monitoring we do. And so in 2019 we'll do the project. And so who wins in this? We know we're going to have success. We hope we have success, pending that it rains, and everybody can get committed to this. But in the end, and it's a bit after it's a success, who wins? First and foremost, the land. We're going to have greater ecosystem productivity, higher watershed function, better water quality downstream. We're going to have improved community dynamics. These neighbors, a lot of them are absentee. They don't know each other except for maybe once a year at a homeowners association meeting. This will be something super positive to bring the community around and say, look at what we did together. It's going to improve ecological community dynamics. We're going to increase that wildlife habitat. And the landscape focused management paradigm is going to replicate itself. When we have successes at this scale, you can't ignore it. And that's the most important piece, is that people will look at this, they'll get creative, and they'll go to their own locality and they'll replicate that landscape scale management paradigm, and more good will happen in the world. Our landowners win. They get to maintain their ag tax through the grazing lease that we're gonna do. They get an increase in their agricultural value, their ecological value, and most important to them, to a lot of them, is the extrinsic land value, that aesthetic value, what they actually purchased their little piece of the West for. They can come out, we'll let them know when the cows are going to be there with their grazing lease, and they can come out and take pictures of the cows on their land and send it back home to their urbanite friends and say, look at what my land looks like. This is so cool. And then they can actually get the numbers through our reporting and accountability processes to say, look at these actual numbers. Look at the carbon that I'm sequestering. Look at how cool this is, and how much good I'm doing in the world. Our livestock producers win because they get potentially new access to forage. They work under a sublease, so regenerative stewardship is actually going to lease the parcels from the landowners and then sublease it to our grazers. And so there's lower liability involved with that. For our livestock producers, it increases their operational flexibility by having more acreage and having smaller acreage that'll be individually fenced off. It increases our land productivity, which then increases their livestock productivity, more money in their pocketbook, and it increases the economic opportunities. So when we have more vitality in our rural agricultural communities, they have more opportunity to come up with new solutions and new ideas to be more profitable, be more productive, and provide more good into the world. And our other stakeholders win. So all those other people that gave us money that participated in some way, they get moral equity satisfied, their social equity satisfied. If it's a green funding thing, they can put that credit on the wall and say, look what we did. They get that annual reporting that they can show to their friends and to their clients and their customers. Uh, the actual accountability per dollar spent. That's the most important piece, because it doesn't matter if they donate to the biggest conservation groups or they pay their taxes and they know it's going to something good somewhere. This actually shows where that money was spent. And it's a real connection to real work. It's not the calendar hanging in the wall with polar bears on it. It's actual good work being done that they, if they wanted to, they could come out, drive to it, and see it and touch it and actually know it exists. So our second solution here. This is an odd picture, I know, for this type of talk, but our second solution is going to be an agricultural solution for agricultural producers, strictly agricultural producers, in an agricultural landscape setting. This doesn't ignore the other wildlife potentials, aesthetic potential in doing landscape scale management. This is just going to discuss the sort of business framework that we want to do landscape scale management at for agricultural producers. So why this oil well? Why this pump jack here? Well, I want to adapt an oil and gas unit into an agricultural unit. I've got a pretty good background going so far in the oil and gas industry, and spend a lot of my time working with oil and gas units. There's a lot of similarities to the needs of the producers, and so I'm going to walk you through how we could modify the oil and gas unit concept into an agricultural unit concept. And so what is a unit? Well, a unit is an arrangement of producers and landowners to collectively develop and produce a specified area. It's an agreement that all these people agree to. And so it's the landowner, or in oil and gas terms, the mineral owner is the royalty interest owner. That's their name. We also have the working interest owner, and that's going to be our producer. In the agricultural sense, it's our livestock owner. And then we have a unit operator. This is the individual or company who manages the pooled interest. They manage the agreement, the arrangement. So the unit operator manages operations on lands that working interest owners lease from royalty interest owners. So here's a diagram of that. We have our unit agreement here in green. This is the thing that everybody signs on to. It's the thing that defines what we're doing here. Up from that, we have our royalty interest owner. That's our landowner. And then we'll clarify that when we start talking about livestock owners that are also landowners in the unit area. But for now, we'll just assume that all of our landowners are not livestock owners, and that they just own land. That's all they do in our specified area. We have livestock owners who are working interest owners, and they lease from royalty interest owners. Then we have our unit operator, and that's the livestock manager. It's the foreman. It's the cowboy that moves them around every day. He's the unit operator, and he has that individual or organization has a management contract with our livestock owners to perform the work that he does. All of these people sign on to the unit agreement. So what actually happens here? Well, first, we have to have a need. The livestock owners need to have a need, and the landowners need to have a need. And generally, this need is, we don't have enough acreage. There's plenty of acreage in this watershed. This watershed or this landscape is defunct ecologically. So let's pool it all together, and we'll mob up all the cows, and we'll move through here as one big operation for better ecological gain, because our assumption is cows are good, not evil. So we need more cows moving faster rather than less cows moving slower. And that's the most important piece. Number 3 here is that the landscape has a need. The next step is to get all these people on board, develop a management document. It's also called the unit agreement. That's going to define where we go, how we go, when we go, why we go, do what we do, and then get to work. And so what's the benefits of unitization? Well, our livestock owners get consolidated management for it's consolidated management for the producers, which reduces their input costs. So when we take all these small parcels in the unit area and we turn it into essentially one large ranch, and then we take all these livestock owners who are operating independently and we turn it into one large herd, and we move this one large herd to this one large ranch, we get a lot less input cost because we aren't all working individually and separately. It's also a larger land base to graze. That's going to lead to an opportunity to stock more head per livestock owner, and then we're also going to get a decreased impact on deeded land because we have that larger land base to work through as a bigger mob. Our landowners get a huge benefit because their uneconomic properties are now included into a larger unit area. And so, especially in small acreage areas where we have these small isolated 40s, isolated quarter sections, whatever they are, that just isn't worth the time to go and lease because I'm only going to be able to lease there for like, a week, and it's going to take me, 2 days on either side of that to get cows there and back. So these uneconomic properties are now going to be able to be included into a larger unit area that we can move through, and they get involved. And then the commitment to the landscape management plan is going to prevent overuse. So if I actually got that quarter section leased, there's a high potential that it's so much of a pain that I'm going to get the goodie out of that lease, right? I'm going to go and I'm going to torch it because I need to make it worth my time. And so when I have a management plan, when we all have a management plan looking back up at the landscape scale, we're going to account for that and say, this is how we properly graze through everybody based on the ecological site. And our smaller landowners who may not have the resources to graze themselves aren't going to be subject to potentially being overgrazed by lessees that are trying to get as much out of an uneconomic lease as they can. All right, so here's our little mock agricultural unit. We're going to keep this as simple as possible. Units can get out of control really fast, especially when you have small participation or participants that have small interests. So when you start getting under like 10%, the numbers start getting really hard to crunch. So we're going to keep it really simple. We got 5 landowners. We don't actually need acreages in order to do the math to show how this works. So just assume that there are 5 owners that own 40%, 20%, 15, 15, and 10. None of our landowners own livestock, and all of our landowners would like to profit from their land that they own. They all have an incentive to keep agricultural taxes on their land rather than vacant land taxes. Assume that they all have the same production value. We'll discuss production value at the end of this segment here. And then all of our landowners are willing to lease and be cool about it. None of them are going to be shady and being weird about leasing and, I don't know, going out and shooting cows or anything. Like, they're all going to be cool about it. All right, so now we have our livestock owners. So assume that these livestock owners have everybody already leased up. We have 3 livestock owners. They will assume that they own 60%, or they lease 60% of our unit area. One leases 30%, and the other leases 10%. We'll discuss what happens when there's unleased parcels in the unit area here at the end. Like I said, none of our livestock owners own land in the unit area. All of our livestock owners would like to profit from their critters, of course. And all of our livestock owners are willing to cooperate in a crop share arrangement and be cool about it. So nobody's going to start getting weird about doing crop share or starting to, I don't know, feud with each other. And then we have our unit operator. So our unit operator is a company or an individual designated by the working interest owners, or maybe even one of the working interest owners, that executes the management plan, manages the financials, disperses payments, ensures that the unit agreement is a success, and they're potentially or probably the actual person on the ground moving animals through the unit. So they're the actual operator they're the actual rancher that's doing the ranching. All right, so in this situation, we've got cows moving through. They're doing their cow thing. We're making money off the way that we do with the cows, whatever that way may be. How does the money actually work? Well, we have our unit production. So we end up selling calves at the end of the year. We do what we do. We make a pile of money. That all goes into the joint operating account. The joint operating account is held jointly by the working interest owners and is managed by the unit operator. And then out of that joint operating account, we cut checks to first the landowners. We've got to pay our leases. And so the landowners get paid based on their lease rate. We'll talk about that here in a second, times their tract percentage. And so we're going to go back to our 40, 20, 15, 15, and 10. All those, so we're going to take 40% times whatever your lease rate is, and you get your percentage, your participation in the joint production. After our leases are paid up, we're going to pay out our operating expenses. That's going to be all of the costs associated with operating the unit, as well as our operators' costs. So if it's a management firm, or if it's like a grazing association that hires on a foreman and hires on cowboys, whatever all those costs are, get dumped into here. And then finally, after that, we pay our livestock owners their percent of the production, and that's going to be herd share, so their percent of the herd share, times whatever the working interest income was minus the operating. And so working interest income is whatever is left over after we pay our landowners, and then that's going to be minus our operating expenses. So we'll show that here in chart form right now. Okay, so just for easy math, I know these aren't realistic numbers, but it shows the math a little bit better. We're going to say that we're going to pay our landowners first, or our lessors. So we'll satisfy our leases first. Our landowners, we'll say the unit made a total of $10,000 this year. That was our total income out of this unit. We've got 5 lessors, 5 landowners with their percentages, that 40, 20, 15, 15, 10, and then their associated lease rates. So let's say that landowner number 2, he's leased by one of our livestock owners. He got a really good lease rate of 25% of the production that happens on his place. So then we have the other 3 here at 20. They get paid 20% of whatever happens on their piece of land. And then we have this guy who just doesn't really know how to negotiate very well, and he's the smallest landowner anyways, so who cares? But so if that makes sense, everybody gets paid some portion of the production, in this case 20% of the production that happens on their piece of the entire unit area. So if we take 15% times 20% times 10,000, landowner number 4 made $300 this year off of his lease. So the unit operator pays the lessors a total of $2,050, and that leaves another $7,950 to pay our lessees and pay the operating expenses out of. Our lessees, it's important to note here that the lessors do not participate in the operating costs of the unit. And so you could set it up that way, but in most units, in the basic math of a unit, the operating expenses are addressed after the lessors are paid their royalty rate. And so it goes either way. I set it up how it is kind of traditionally here, but you could certainly add in a deduction for an equitable deduction for operating expenses at this point. So our working interest owners. We've got our 3 livestock owners here owning their 60, 30, and 10. We're going to deduct our operations expenses from our working interest and do out the math here. So for livestock owner number 1, the total leftover working interest income was $7,900 minus $500 worth of operating expenses. You see that's the same across everybody here. So everybody is taking their cut of $7,450. His 60% cut of the herd of the $7,450 comes out to $4,470. So that's what he made this year off this unit. Off that total $10,000 that was made, he gets paid $4,470. So in the end, our unit operator pays out the lessees $7,450, and the unit operator pays to operating expenses $500. I did my math a little wrong here and forgot to add in a more realistic sort of operator cost, but let's just say the operator is really nice. He didn't charge us a whole lot for operating costs. But the unit operator, his expenses, do get added into the operation expenses there. So we'll balance the books here. What we end up getting is 3 landowners who all get paid their percentages of what was left over after we paid our lessors and our operating expenses. Their total payment for participating in the unit is $7,450. Our landowners, they each got their equitable share of the production based on their royalty rate times their participation in the unit, which came out to a total of $2,050. We had operation expenses of $500, and all that comes out to $10,000 of the total production. We can look at that a different way here, where each of our landowners and our livestock owners got their pieces as they have share in the activities going on. And so there's a lot of ways that we can sophisticate this up. These 3 things specifically would want to be addressed and included in an actual agricultural unit arrangement. So first, the livestock owners can also be landowners. Obviously, this is going to happen. If you have livestock owners, their deeded ground is going to be mixed up inside the unit area. And so what happens is that the other working interest owners, so the collective working interest owners, negotiate some sort of lease rate with that livestock owner. Probably going to be the average of whatever the unit area is. In our case, it would be like that 20% mark across those 5 different landowners. Whatever that percentage rate may be. Then that particular livestock owner gets both the royalty interest rate and his royalty interest rate from his deeded ground, whatever that allocation is, as well as his working interest from the crop share after those unit operating expenses have been deducted. The second piece that you really want to consider when talking about an agricultural unit would be tract allocation based on parcel productivity. So if one end of our unit is really unproductive or has had really bad management in the past, and the other end is like really good, obviously we're going to be spending more time down on the other end where it's really good and less time up on the unproductive end. So why should those 2 landowners get the same benefit out of their land? So if they're both 10 acres and they both have the same royalty rate, and we graze one end of the ranch a lot more than we do the other, then those 2 landowners are getting the same payment for very different use. And so we would want to put in a parcel productivity and base our payments off of, do the tract allocation. It would come back here to where your 40%, that's not based on acreage, that would be based on production value. So your land is contributing 40% of the entire vegetation available in the unit, rather than 40, and it may only be 25% of the total acreage, but you're contributing 40% of the total forage value. And so we would want to modify our tract allocation, our tract percentage here, based on some way that we agree upon to do parcel productivity as our method for that. Then we're going to have the potential to have unleased landowners when we create the unit. So we have all these livestock owners, they have deeded ground, they have leased ground. We can come back to the common pattern of agricultural land. What do we do with these unleased pieces? Well, in most unit arrangements, those owners have the opportunity to join the unit as a working interest owner. So they would be able to buy into the working interest group. In order to participate in the unit, you have to give us X amount of money in which we will buy cows with, or whatever livestock it is with, and then those are yours. We'll buy them on your behalf. You get to put your own brand on them, on all of them. You own them, full liability for them, everything like that. They'll just run with us, and just like everybody else. And then it just reverts back to that step one up above, where those landowners now get to participate as livestock owners. They get the royalty interest off their land. They also get their working interest from the crop share. So I'll leave it there. There in Rocky Ford, we'll open it up for questions. On this video, I will be happy to answer questions in the comments, and talk about any of these points further with you. And I hope you enjoyed this. I just want to leave you with 3 points that are really important to remember out of this presentation. And that's that landscape scale management is important. Obviously, it's important. There's so many things that we can address with landscape scale management, and so many opportunities to be profitable and productive from landscape scale management. Every stakeholder must be considered and satisfied. All of our livestock owners need to be considered and satisfied. Our landowners need to be considered and satisfied. And we always need to look for additional opportunities to fund new creative strategies to do better ecologically, economically, and socially. And in order to do that, we have to look everywhere for new stakeholders that want to participate, and make sure that we're capable of satisfying their needs, but also make sure that they're capable of satisfying our needs. And you are your only limitation. Your fear of success, lack of creativity is the only thing that's going to hold you back. And so when you get outside the box, don't be afraid, and have fun while you're out there. So there's my contact info. Feel free to get in touch with me on my website, regionstewardship.com, or on Facebook. We're very active on Facebook, facebook.com/regionstewardship. Happy to email back and forth or give me a call anytime. If you want to join it, we'd be happy to meet you face-to-face in Rocky Ford, February 9th, at the Arkansas Valley Farm Ranch Water Symposium. And anyhow, leave your comments in the comment section below, here on Facebook or on YouTube, wherever you're watching this. And look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks.